everybody, and welcome to the Responsible AI Report from the Responsible AI Institute, where we are speaking with some of the leading experts in responsible AI. I'm very excited. We have two guests joining us today, Bryan McGowan and Chris Jambor. Bryan and Chris, thanks so much for joining me on the show today.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick.
So much for having us.
It's great to have you both here. Of course, you both work for KPMG, who's a valued member of the Responsible AI Institute. And it's really been incredible just to see the work that you've been doing at KPMG in the AI space. And of course, the work that we've been doing together as well. Bryan, you are, of course, a principal in the KPMG advisory practice and the leader of the U.S. Trusted AI for Consulting. And Chris, you're a member of the KPMG AI and Digital Innovation Group's Trusted AI team, focusing on AI literacy and the responsible uses of AI. So it's safe to say that you two are coming to this conversation with a wealth of experience, especially in an industry that is, we're all figuring out how to adapt and address all these changes that are happening in AI innovation and regulation. And so I'm actually wondering if we could start there. And Bryan, I'll direct this to you first. I'm wondering if you could talk with us about some of the issues around the limitations of AI models and the importance of understanding how your models are performing. I think this is something that a lot of organizations are trying to figure out right now.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. Actually, a good place to start as well, Patrick. But as we know, the Gen AI tools and models, they're evolving. They're being integrated into business processes at a record pace. And so we've seen a number of results, sometimes good, sometimes not, where these tools are implemented without proper guardrails and considerations. And so, at KPMG, we recognize there's a huge opportunity to we use the phrase be bold, fast, and responsible, and that's our approach to adopting AI at the firm. And it's one that we want to that's a mantra, if you will, that we want to follow, but it's also one that we want to then take kind of take that story to our clients and help them with their journeys as well. That's kind of what led us into developing these system cards, this concept of system cards. I'm excited to share a little bit more about some of that. But what we were noticing is, and to your point, there's a growing need for some of these core principles: explainability, transparency, security, and a number of these other topics. And the reason they're important is because some of the adverse effects, hallucinations or inaccuracies or false information, these things are a real challenge when you're trying to deploy Gen AI at scale. And so the system card concept, and maybe just as I mentioned this, Patrick, we had shared over, there's just a brief snippet that maybe you could pull up for the folks that are able to view it on screen. But essentially, this is a patent pending framework that we've put together. We call them AI system cards, and it's part of an overall AI governance program that we're implementing at KPMG that's built around and tied directly to the trusted AI framework that we've developed. And it's designed to really be a comprehensive and structured approach for developing, deploying, and managing, both ethical and responsible AI. And so kind of as you see some of this information, what it does is it just provides an overview, right? And I'll call it a common way for us all to speak and understand. So as we're building something maybe in the US, for example, and maybe some of our colleagues in another country around the world are going to be doing something similar or using some of the technology. One of the advantages of these system cards, in addition to just making sure that we have a structured approach to think through, how we're developing and deploying, it's also a common language for us to share that information with colleagues that may pick up or leverage some of these systems, to have the comfort and the confidence that these systems has followed, a structured and a robust approach, and they can feel comfortable kind of leveraging those in other parts of the world.
Yeah, you make a really good point, Bryan, that creating system cards provides a structure and a process for us to be able to assess AI systems. Chris, to that point, I'm wondering if you could share with us how these AI system cards work. Why do you believe this is a responsible way to assess your AI systems, and how do they improve AI literacy in the workplace?
It's a great question, Patrick. And If we really think about the foundation of the system card for KPMG, it's really based on our KPMG Trusted AI framework. So what we did at the onset of all of this generative AI implementation coming into business was sit down and really think about what it meant to be a responsible AI practitioner. What that led us to do is look at our values, look at our other guiding principles, and really come up with what ended up being 10 pillars of trusted AI for us. These are the components that Bryan's talked about already, things like fairness, accountability, explainability, transparency, all of these concepts that really help us ground our decision making when looking at the AI development lifecycle. Everything from designing and building all the way through the deployment and then sort of continuous monitoring. So from there, what the system card does is it allows us to gather up all of those key elements, underlying model elements, but also the things that are part of the system that the AI models are a part of, the ecosystem, if you will. So this helps us better understand how the model is functioning against those pillars that we mentioned. And what we did from there was develop our own sort of robust, independent testing criteria and methodology. That, after we run through these tests, gives us a better idea of how the model is functioning. And then from there, we've also created a methodology that allows us to attach to these systems a level of trust, basically. And all of this is partially to help us with our improving our literacy, right? We want all of our professionals to be able to reference these cards and see exactly the information they're going to need to know if the system is right for them, if the model is going to be appropriate for their work, their client work, and also that it's protecting all of our data and our information. But then on top of that, we want to make sure that it fulfills our obligations to transparency and explainability. We want to be able to provide not only our professionals, but anyone that comes in contact with any of these models, a reference point to see, hey, this does actually do pretty well under security testing. We can feel confident that this is going to keep our data private, and also that we're going to be able to explain these results, things like that. So really, the system card is supposed to be a jumping off point for a responsible and ethical use case of any of these models and systems.
Yeah, and Chris, I might just jump in for a second.
Sure.
And one thing I'd say about that too is, in terms of the how. So Chris talked about our framework, our methodology, and essentially what we've done is we start with those higher level principles. We think about how those principles align across the AI lifecycle, and then we define very specific attributes underneath each one of those principles that are then backed by specific testing procedures and a methodology that leads us ultimately to what we call a trust score. And so users are able to look at that and say, we have a really high trust score, say for security, but maybe we have concerns around data integrity, or maybe we have concerns around privacy. That then tells the user of those system cards, there's some more work that we need to do there. Let's now go double click and see what specifically is going on with that particular AI system. So it's meant to be, like I said, going back to the comments around just kind of being a common language, if you will, that we can use between developers and users and executive teams in a way that we can communicate in very simple terms, and at least I feel very simple terms, when you have an executive dashboard that kind of takes a very complex topic and boils it down into very practical terms.
Yeah, this resonates with me so much. That ability to be able to parse things down into practical language, into simple language, is so essential. I think that sometimes it's tempting to dive into the complexities of things, and I think a lot of times it's easy to get lost in that. But if we're able to use something like system cards to distill that information at a high level and present it to whether it's stakeholders, executives, to others, a part of organizational teams, I could really see it creating a cohesive understanding then of what needs to get done as it relates to use cases with AI. We've seen, obviously, at this point, multiple issues around AI, from copyright issues to intellectual property infringement to deep fake abuse. I'm wondering, I would love to hear both of your thoughts on how you believe AI system cards might be able to mitigate risks like these.
Yeah. Maybe Chris, I'll start and then let you chime in on any additional items. But if I think about each one of those categories that you just mentioned, copyright and IP. So within the system cards, and kind of going back to the attributes we talked about, we have specific guidelines to really make sure that the AI systems comply with things like data privacy regulations or intellectual property laws. But that's also the underlying component there is thinking about some of the configurable items that will exist within an AI system and making sure, for instance, if there are protections provided by a particular platform or product provider, that we have the appropriate, so maybe the content filtering needs to be at a certain level in order to qualify for instance. Those are the sorts of details that we're going to get to help to start to mitigate, some of those concerns. If you think about the topic of deep fakes, that's another one that's very important to us. And so, topics that come to mind there are security, some of the transparency items, but then a lot of the accountability measures as well will help to kind of combat some of those deep fake items, making sure that the content that's generated by AI is clearly labeled, that you can there's some sort of a traceability back to a source. Being able to make sure that you're establishing and fostering trust and integrity for each one of these systems. And I think that's something maybe just underlies this, just to mention here too, is our thought is by taking a very intentional by design approach, right? These system cards are the outcome of a much more robust governance program. And we think that an AI governance program that considers a lot of these things that we're talking about today, that really establishes that foundation of trust, just helps to drive overall better results, better quality of these AI systems, but also helps to drive usage and likely drive ROI when you can users and folks impacted by these systems can have trust and confidence in the results that they produce.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Bryan. And I also think you hit the nail on the head when you mentioned sort of the larger, robust AI governance approach. The system cards are one sort of lever of to be able to pull here. And when it comes to a lot of these issues that we're seeing, whether it's IP, whether it's deepfakes, whether it's lacks of accountability, I think we also need to remember that we're at the very, very beginning of all of this. It's been a couple of years, which feels like a lot has happened, but really it's just the tip of the iceberg, and we're right at the beginning of this timeline. So I think also the fact that the system cards and our approach to AI governance that we are applying to our own work as well, it's scalable. It's built to be able to adjust and grow as the technology grows, as the understanding of the technology grows, as the testing of the technology grows. So we have worked very, very hard to make sure that these system cards can continue to mature just as the technology does, and continue to prepare people to think about these things. I think a lot of the mistakes that end up happening are just because people haven't had enough examples to see what not to do, so they become the example, right? If something goes wrong, this is how you learn, right? So I think that what we're trying to do is just get out ahead of this, make sure that people have what they need, a sign, a little guidepost to be able to navigate their way on this area where honestly we're all still kind of learning as we go.
Yeah, Chris, you triggered a thought for me that I think hopefully folks may assume this, but if not, we should just hit it directly. The approach that we're talking about in the testing and the validation, this is not a manual step where we have 100 procedures that we're going through and expecting just kind of all of this manual testing. We are very much thinking about the AI tech stack, and we're thinking about and being very intentional about where can we leverage some of the data that comes out of the core components. So if I'm looking at a topic like fairness, there's a number of different solutions, and we use some at KPMG as well, that are already doing disparate impact or bias analyses, or we have tools in the system that are also doing very specific focus on security or other topics. So we want to extract that information in. So when we're talking about establishing a trust score and developing a system card, we're not doing that on a purely manual basis. We're pulling in that data from those key systems across the tech stack, and those are ultimately feeding in to help satisfy some of that criteria and augment some of the additional manual steps that are done on top. So that's a little bit more into the how it works, just to give you a little bit of sense for what we're doing.
Yeah, you both make really good points in that it really is processes like using system cards that are going to lay the foundation for years to come. Chris, to your point that we're really just at the tip of the iceberg right now. I know myself, I can't even begin to imagine what's down the road in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. But it's the work that you're doing at KPMG that is really laying the groundwork for years to come to make sure that we're doing this in a trusted and responsible way moving forward. So Bryan and Chris, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us on the Responsible AI Report. and not only for taking the time, but also your commitment to this work, to the work that KPMG is doing as well. As I mentioned at the top of our conversation, it's very exciting to see what KPMG is building and developing, not only with the AI system cards, but all your other initiatives as well. So I'm very excited to see how things continue to grow and develop. I'm wondering if you could just share with our listeners where they could find out more information about the AI system cards, where they could find out more about the KPMG Trusted AI team, as well as both of you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the easiest for any of the folks that are on some of the platforms, we'll include links and to our bios and information. But for the folks listening on other platforms, if you just go to kpmg.com/trusted AI, that'll take you right to our landing page where there's a ton of good resources, information about our team, our approach, as well as just some of our thought leadership on various different topics, like some of the ones that we talked about today. So that's probably the best place to start. And then, again, feel free to reach out to either one of us. Happy to share a little bit more with you. But really do appreciate you having us on and for the opportunity to spend a few minutes today talking about what we're doing at KPMG.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here, Patrick. Thank you so much for having us.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll be sure to include those links in our show description. So viewers or listeners out there, all you have to do is scroll down, click those various links provided. Chris and Bryan, thanks so much again.
Yep. Thank you.